Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Geremy Jasper, who is the writer, director, and songwriter for his movie Odessa. And one of the first things I was really interested in terms of the journey of this film coming to screen, was I've heard you describe how you had this initial idea of a woman with a guitar wandering through a wasteland about 20 years ago, and it was something that just continued to sit at the back of your mind in a lot of ways. And that there was a moment where you thought maybe you would make a concept album, maybe it was going to be a stage piece, and then once you stepped into filmmaking with, making patty cakes, which is a wonderful movie, by the way, that you started to envision the idea of this potentially as a movie. And so I was just really interested in what that journey looked like of the different iterations to ultimately envision it as a movie and something that would be seen on screen.
Yeah, it's been a very long process getting to this place of making it as a film because, it started off as a concept for maybe a stage play, maybe a maybe a concept album. Just, I kind of fell in love with this character that was kind of like a female Orpheus that was going to eventually have to go into the underworld that had some sort of musical magical power. Um, And once I started drawing little pictures of her, and once I could see her in my brain, then she would just kind of haunt me every couple years, and she would reappear. And there was a point where I was like, I'm gonna write a movie, and this was right before Patty Cakes, and I went to my one of my producing partners and I started to tell him about Odessa, and he was like, "That is way too insane. That is way too ambitious. No one is going to give you a red cent to make that, but store that away. It's really interesting, but store it away." And so after we made Patty, I was like, well, what is the story that I really need to tell? Like what just like speaks to me? And that this was that project. This was that character, for better or for worse. And so luckily I had been writing all of these songs over the years, and they just sort of dovetailed with her as a character and a world. There's something very autobiographical about the film, even though it's, in a fantasy world. It's kind of how my imagination works. It's like my inner mythology. Um, and so it was a challenge, but also a great joy to bring that out. You know, the images, the music, the world, those are all the things that kind of live inside me, where sometimes reality is less real than that world to me. Yeah.
And I think it's so interesting to hear you say that the imagery of this is something that, really existed in your mind for a long time as well. And so I wanted to ask about just that journey of the way that you'd started to visualize this story, and even just little elements of how it might look and feel, and then turning that into something that looked and felt really tangible on screen. And what was that starting point for you in figuring out how to realize that?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, back in the day, I started off as a collage artist, and I would make these elaborate collages that would take sources from all different places. And I felt like my eye as a director was to, okay, we're going to take this tuba from 1930s, New Orleans, and we're going to graft it onto, a sort of 60s sci-fi looking thing, and blending those things. That juxtaposition, that friction really excites me. And so I've always liked mixing different high and low art, or something from the junkyard with like an antique vase. Like those kinds of things grafted together really excites me. And the world of Odessa, the sound of Odessa, the characters in Odessa, the archetypes, it was going to have that kind of junk shop collage vibe. Um, And so early on, I started doing collages for it. I started doing drawings. I had collected thousands and thousands of images because I knew it wanted to be its own thing. And the colors were very important. Just the entire vibe, because I'm a huge fan of dystopian, post-apocalyptic, Mad Max kind of films. Like they're very dear to my heart. But I wanted this one to look different and feel different, that had elements of the 30s, the 70s, and the future, and could feel like it was like the boat shot at the bodega in my corner in Brooklyn. So it was a mix. And then we brought in Scott Dugan, who was our production designer, and he really got it. He could grasp what this thing was, and he visualized it and made it real. And then there was the step of going to Croatia and trying to find these interesting little locations that felt out of time or felt in our fantasy world. And we got really lucky at some places, some strange alleys or some really incredible architecture of abandoned hospitals, like, 15 minutes out of Zagreb, or a strange little kind of port town that we built on the beach. So yeah, it was it's a lot of different a lot of different influences, a lot of different locations, and the thrill for me is welding those things all together. Yeah.
Right, because that collage sensibility that you're describing there kind of really makes sense in terms of how we transition from the beginning of the story, where we meet Odessa and she's in this kind of slightly desolate farmland, into where she goes into the city, and it's this, kind of like darkness with all of these neon lights and kind of blue hues coming forth. But there's this transition period, like when she's chasing after the train and she throws up, and it's this really bright blue color. And so was that kind of collage sensibility of wanting to start building little inklings of it before we even get to the city?
Yes, yes, you can see like there's a trail of breadcrumbs of how toxic things are, or like that things are going askew. Um, and yeah, yeah. And the fact that they're drinking like blue moonshine, and then I really wanted, there's a woman who blows fire, and I really wanted that fireball to be blue, but it was impossible. But we held on to as much as we could with our limited means. But yeah, there's a slow progression towards like full polluted plastic perversion. Yeah.
And you were talking earlier about how you'd been writing songs that have kind of led towards this for a long time. And I wanted to ask you a bit about that, because the music takes a real journey in terms of the sound and the feel and the sensibilities that we have with Odessa, with Sadie Sink's character, because there's this kind of almost like bluegrass feel to it, but then there's more of a grittiness that starts to come into play as she experiences the world outside of this bubble that she's grown up in. And so how did you want to evolve that idea of this amalgamation of genres and different sounds and feels for her?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I wanted to start it really grounded in a kind of mountain, sort of Americana, or even like British folk kind of placement, and for it to be really intimate and handmade. And there's like, there's a little pump organ and there's horns, and it just feels like organic and from the soil. And then as she progresses on this kind of musical odyssey, there's, synthesizers start to kind of contaminate what she's doing, or it becomes a little bit more rock oriented, or it becomes a little bit more distorted, and there's like drums and percussions and things kind of build and build and build as we go on this journey. Uh, yeah, and I wanted her style, and I like variety. So I wanted an excuse to write in different styles that all felt like her, that they were coming through her personality and her voice, but that evolved throughout the piece. Yeah.
I love that. And within the story, there's this real state of control that's existing within society from this character, Plutonovich, played by Murray Bartlett. And I thought it was so interesting that there's these different ways that he kind of controls everybody. There's the idea of being punished in such a public way. And, we see TV screens throughout constantly. So even though you see security cameras, the TV screens make it feel like someone's always watching, and, everything's always very claustrophobic around everybody, so they can't ever escape it. How did you come up with the different ways like you felt like that would exist for him?
Well, it was someone who is a dictator through entertainment, who people's attention span is their where people put their eyes and their attention is their life force. And so to have someone that just people are glued to, people are excited by, people are entertained by, people are scared of, like that strange combination that works with a sort of cult of personality, um, that really takes over people's nervous systems and imaginations. Um, I wanted a world where we could embrace, well, visually embrace TV screens, which have always been kind of a big part of the work that I've done. And so, how can we place those all over the world, all over this little land, and have his image and demented form of entertainment kind of contaminate everything? Yeah.
And when we first meet Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s character, Yuri, we see him performing in this club and, there's this facial covering that he's wearing. And so it's that idea of you're performing, but you don't ever really get to have your own voice or be
Yes.
yourself or have a say in anything. How did you want to create this journey for him visually and character wise, where he starts to really kind of find more of his own voice and more of himself?
That's very, very astute of you. Yeah, there's a feeling that he's masked, he's hidden, he's jaded, he's cynical, he's beaten down by this world, but he's still an artist and he still needs to express himself, get up on that stage and get some sort of that energy out. It's also like a seduction, and it's might also be the way he pays the bills. But through his relationship with Odessa, he starts to take the mask off and he starts to kind of refine why he does this in the first place. Or no, not even why he does it, why he's a human being in the first place. She just kind of reminds him of something that all of these people have lost. And so, yes, through the process, he hopefully it comes through, becomes more of his authentic self. Yeah.
I also love the small detail in you kind of get this really lived in feel, but then you've got that heart-shaped bathtub. Was that something that you had envisioned, or was that something that you found on location when you were filming?
No, it was always envisioned. I used to stay I used to stay at these really crappy like uh hotels off the side of the highway in New Jersey, and a lot of them had heart-shaped bathtubs in them. And there was just something about the combination of like the most gnarly, disgusting place you can imagine with this like, but isn't it romantic, that I always loved. And there's a long tradition in especially the Northeast of these like romantic getaway honeymoon suite thing. And I grew up watching these commercials in the 90s that were always played on cable, and they just seemed so demented to me. So yeah, that's why there's one in there. Yeah,
Also, in talking a little bit about Regina Hall's character, Neon Dion, again, just the visual aspects of it are so great, even down to just like the really straight bangs. But you have that kind of story piece with her leg and the way that Yuri is kind of like tending to her and caring for her. How did you come up with not just the visual look for her as a character, but kind of how you wanted that to manifest in who she is as a person and that relationship that she has of control with Yuri as well?
yeah. Well, the story is really like is based on kind of classic westerns. So Odessa is sort of the stranger from from a strange land, stranger in strange land, kind of like coming in like Clint Eastwood to town. And there's usually like the soiled dove, that's Yuri, and usually it's a she, is under the thumb of like the mobster boss who's running that town. And so that's who Dion became. Um, and initially she was written to be a man, and like but things just sort of morphed. And once I found who I thought was really the most the archetype that to me was the most kind of intimidating, scary person that I could think of was like Grace Jones in her prime. And so the character started to morph, and then Regina got involved, and then we started to kind of build this character piece by piece. um and you wanted someone who like was so beaten up by this lawless place that they lost any, you know, almost every shred of their humanity, and had to like survive through instilling violence, or and so that character just kind of that character is really fun to build but complicated. Um, so yeah, yeah,
With Yuri, was there almost this sense of, she's who he could become if he continued to lose his sense of self, if he wasn't kind of
exactly.
pulled back to the other side by Odessa, and so he kind of exists in the middle of the two of them?
That's exactly right. She was like the dark path. That's where like really losing all hope in humanity will bring you. Yeah.
I love that. And in talking about the TV show that Plutanovich has in the series, it has such kind of like a clear visual aesthetic, and it feels very nostalgic, but also futuristic, which is kind of the vibe of the entire film. How did you set about deciding what you wanted that to look and feel like?
Yeah, that's been an aesthetic that I've played with for probably 10 years. This kind of glitchy digital technicolor psychedelic nightmare vibe. It's like where you have like candy colored skulls and kind of hyper flashing images. And I work really closely with this guy, Gustavo Torres, who's just like a brilliant designer and animator, one man band. And we did music videos together back in the day. We've never met in person. We've always worked just like over the internet. It's a really kind of wild collaboration, but we've developed a style together, and he can just kind of do it all. And so that look of the Plutanovich one world is really a deep collaboration between us. Yeah.
I know, and it almost feels like there's kind of like different elements and kind of archetypes from music videos that we see at different points with some of the musical numbers. Because I'm just thinking about the first time that Odessa sings to Yuri, and you have that kind of like real softness, and like in the editing, there's like this crossfades between them. So it's kind of like the two of them merging together. How did you come up with the choices of how you wanted that particular number to really just immediately connect these two characters?
Yeah, I always wanted when there's like a string swell and for something, all I told uh Rena Yang, who's the cinematographer, is just want something dreamy to happen here, something sort of soft and abstract and just like that sense when you're falling in love with someone that you're kind of out of time. And Rena's really brilliant, and she found these special lenses, and we shot it at a different speed, and those lenses just like blurred everything. It's all in camera, and then Jay Rabinowitz, the editor, started to just kind of superimpose them on top. So it was like sort of sketched out to be this kind of psychedelic, slightly hallucinatory love moment, but like all those elements coming together and everybody throwing in on it made it a special little moment. Yeah.
And talking a little bit more about Odessa and kind of her arc throughout the story, she kind of starts off in this real bubble. She lives in a very isolated space, and it's really her and her mom and these stories that she's heard about her dad growing up. And as she goes through it, it feels like she becomes hardened because she has this more realistic view of the world around her and beyond, but it doesn't feel like she becomes jaded. And so, how did you set about kind of finding that balance of wanting to have a more realistic view of the world, but not wanting it to change who she is fundamentally?
Yeah, I think that's something we're all dealing with. We come into it's a story of innocence to experience. And so, how do you maintain your uh, your humanity or imagination or your heart in a world that's constantly pounding you and showing you terrible stuff and like making you feel worse and worse and more cynical about human beings and the state of the world. And that was like a bit of a tightrope walk, where didn't want her to be completely naive through that, but still all the artists that I really love, they still hold on to that. Like I think about someone like John Lennon, like he was outwardly cynical in a way, but you'd listen to his music and like what he's singing about are all the things that actually really matter to us. Uh, and I wanted something like that with Odessa. You want her to just be swallowed up and be like another cynical, ironic take on that. We've got enough of that. We live in that. So
Did it help as well that there's this real driving factor kind of amongst all of the characters of no matter where they are on this journey, that they yearn for some sort of connectivity and some sense of community? Because, even Regina's character is so hardened and kind of away from who she probably was several years ago. But you can see that there's still that connectivity that she has with Yuri, that's something that's important to her to be able to connect to someone, even if it's not in the right way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's really astute. That's really true. And that's something I was really impressed with Regina, that she was able to bring out like these little glimpses of humanity, of like frailty, of connection, of jealousy, of like real human aspects. These characters are bigger than life, and they're archetypes, and it's a mythological story, but they're still human underneath it all, and they're still looking for love and connection and community in a world that doesn't exist. Yeah.
I love that I've also heard you describe that you kind of felt like the actors that were immediately interested in this as a story and as a project kind of immediately had this natural curiosity and kind of sense of fearlessness just in being interested in what this could be. And I was interested in kind of how that kind of immediately told you what this collaboration might end up looking like with the cast that you were bringing onto this.
Yeah, it's not your normal movie. I thought it was, and that's where I feel like I was like, oh, it's a hero's journey. It's just like Star Wars, but it's not. And I learned that through the many year process of developing it. And there were people that came towards it, or that engaged with it, that really understood something fundamentally about the spirit of the film, and they weren't scared by it, and they were excited by it, and that that was so important to me, and I needed it so much, and we got really lucky where those people and their skills and who they were playing just lined up beautifully, and like they became those characters, and they were down to clown. They were they were down to dig in and go into this strange world and trust me, and brought so much to this world and these characters, and we just had fun doing it. It was so hard. We made this movie for like $15, but there was a lot of passion, and there was a lot of love and care that went into it. So yeah.
It's amazing when everything kind of comes together in the way that it should, collaboration wise. So, congratulations on the movie. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Appreciate your
Thanks.
time today.
Great questions. Really appreciate it. All right.